Well, hey folks, I'm coming to you from London, England again. I'm downtown, right next to actually the Prime Minister's house and the cabinet offices. Now there's a whole lot of speculation going on around the 4 Gilgo Beach murder victims on New York's Long Island. People have been wondering if dolls are involved, if cages have been removed from storage sheds, or if the accused serial killer was collecting trophies. Well, instead of speculating, let's dig into the things that we know. The question I've got is, did the district attorney spill the beans on national television? Well, welcome to Profiling Evil in this special edition on the Gilgo Beach Four, and possibly the greater Long Island serial killer. Now, I'm coming to you from downtown London, England, where I've been meeting with officials in the Whitehall area. I've been in such a historic part of the world that I really would encourage everyone out there to make a trip to London and check things out. In fact, I'm on my lunch break and I just spent a few minutes at the National Police Memorial before coming over and recording this. I wanted to get the video out, so for those of you who have been a little unhappy about background noise in London or New York City, I hope you'll get over it. I just wanted to make sure this video gets out in a timely manner. So thanks for subscribing, hitting the like button. Make sure you're joining and sharing Profiling Evil with all of your friends. You know, over the last couple of days, I've done a lot of court TV. Thankfully, it's worked out well for me because it's the evenings here in the UK. I was with Julie Grant and Michael Ayala on court TV to talk about Rex Heuermann and the Gilgo Beach case. Now, if Heuermann is found to be responsible for these murders, it means that Suffolk County Investigative Task Force has brought to closure this 12-year saga. You know, in a televised interview just a few days ago, Suffolk County District Attorney Ray Tierney said that he organized this new task force shortly after becoming district attorney. Actually about, almost 2 years after becoming district attorney. It was in February of last year. By March, they were focusing on Rex Heuermann, and they looked at him as a strong possibility as the suspect. Now, Tierney made it clear that he believes that Heuermann acted alone. That, in effect, was quashing all online rumors about his alleged accomplice, perhaps even his wife, being involved in this thing. In fact, the district attorney made it very clear that she was out of town when they announced that 2 of her hair fibers were found on some of the victims. So like I said, Tierney made it clear that Rex Heuermann, in their opinion, acted alone. Heuermann's wife and children were not only out of the state of New York, they were out of the country in some of these cases, but this guy is being called evil from folks all around the globe. And Julie Grant asked me during a court TV appearance what my thoughts were about that very question. I want to replay that because I think it's so interesting that this same theory keeps coming up every single time a serial predator is identified.
And we're talking about suspected serial killer Rex Heuermann coming up next with Sonny and Commander Mike King, who's another one of our court TV regulars that we love. And the commanders, you know, does criminal profiling. So we're going to talk about this guy, this architect, this guy that is accused of at least 3 murders in the Gilgo Beach area. Will we see more from him, and what kind of a guy does that? Of course. I want to bring in our guest now, still with me, law enforcement expert Sonny Slaughter. I want to welcome in another guest who is making time for us from London, England this morning. He's one of our court TV regulars, retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King. Mike, great to see you as well. Oh boy. Okay, Matt Johnson, you just heard, was telling us how prosecutors are calling Rex Heuermann a demon. Mike King, you do criminal profiling. Everybody check out his podcast, Profiling Evil. What do you see when you look at this guy? Who are we dealing with, please?
You know, it is so hard in these kinds of cases because these predators don't fit what our mind suggests a demon would look like. And so this is really interesting because we're seeing the flip side. We're seeing some neighbors who are saying, hey, this is a normal Joe. We're seeing others who say, creeps me out a little bit. Employees who are saying, hey, he was a good boss and I never expected this happening. This is a repeat of what we hear when every serial killer comes out, that we hear these kinds of comments. And, you know, this is really interesting because it brings out how important it is to understand the differences in people's different personas, Julie. This public life that we see with this guy with his photo here as part of his architectural business. Then there's the private side that each of us have, or maybe sometimes we say some things that we're wish we hadn't said, or we do some things that those closest to us get to know. But it's the secret side victims in these predatory kinds of cases experience, and rarely do we get to see the secret side, but we're seeing pieces of it come out in that arrest affidavit talking about his internet searches and other things. So it's really going to boil down to understanding that who we see in public may not be the person in secret that those victims saw.
Exactly, Commander. And look at some of these searches. I mean, teen girl begging for rape porn, 10-year-old schoolgirl, girl hogtied torture porn, girl with face beat up. I mean, all of this stuff, nude slave girls. I mean, all of this stuff indicates this is a guy who wanted to see pictures of kids and wanted to see pictures of violence.
Now, Heuermann is being called evil from folks all around the globe. And Julie Grant asked me during a Court TV appearance what my thoughts were about this description that's being given to him. I wanted to replay that because I think it's so dang interesting. It's the same question that comes up in almost every serial killer case whenever these serial predators are identified. So let's listen and frankly watch closely as we move from what neighbors might be saying to a more direct discussion about what might have motivated Heuermann if he was, in fact, the Gilgo Beach killer.
Commander King, talk to me about this, please. You took the words right out of my mouth, Sonny, and I thank you for that. Is he involved with any other murders, if he did do the 3 murders that the state of New York is accusing him of already? Commander, what do you say to that question in terms of the likelihood of that?
Well, I think the likelihood is going to be pretty strong. I mean, this is a 49-year-old man, or 59-year-old. At the time these murders, he would have been about 47 years old. That's 10 years older than most serial killers when you look at the statistics, Julie, which makes you say, is this a late bloomer? If in fact he's responsible for these murders, or is he in fact someone who was experienced, but as time goes on, we've seen in other criminal cases where these serial predators start to get a little bit disorganized as time goes on and they start to make mistakes. And so was it that he's not in his prime and he finally started making mistakes that led to the law enforcement folks being able to put some forensics together digitally and physical forensics? Or was he brand new? And you know what? Just the way, the sophistication of the way these victims were bundled up in a bag and delivered and placed, staged into areas where they could be hidden, because these guys want to get away with this, all suggests that there's some level of experience there. So I think we're going to be surprised if he doesn't come out with more charges.
Mm-hmm. Right, Commander.
Well, during his interview on national television, District Attorney Tierney was cautious to only reflect on the victims and the cases where Heuermann's been charged. And that's only 3 victims out of the Gilgo 4, although it's expected that number 4 is going to be coming pretty quickly. Now, he skirted questions suggesting that there might be more victims. It's likely that this 4th charge will come in the coming days as additional DNA evidence is completed in the case. And I suspect that murder will also be attributed to Heuermann. And while this might happen, cases where the victims are decapitated, or cases like the Shannon Gilbert case, may not end up being victims of Heuermann. Now that's really difficult to hear from surviving family members because they desperately want this additional closure that would come with that. But the characteristics in those murders is much different than the characteristics in the Gilgo 4, or at least the 3 that have been charged. So are there other victims? I mean, that seems to be the real question, and it's going to be really difficult for Heuermann to overcome what appears to be incredibly strong evidence that ties him back to the murders. Now, if you watched my previous video where I outlined the location of Heuermann's residence in comparison to the discovery site of those victims, the place where each victim was recovered, you're going to see that he lived in close proximity. So make sure you go back to that video and pay close attention to the routes that I've created. I plotted out the routes showing the locations where each victim was recovered and those in correlation to a route that was most probable back to Heuermann's home. On that video, you're also going to see where several of the victims were last seen, very near to Heuermann's Manhattan office. Well, now, after the arrest, Heuermann is speaking loudly that he's innocent. The court has appointed an attorney to represent him, and that attorney quickly met with a group of reporters outside of the courthouse to offer some words of counsel to those reporters and to all of us. And it was captured in this great video clip that I thought you'd be interested in. Now, defense attorneys have an incredibly tough job of trying to represent people who have been accused of such horrible things. Many of us are already making up our minds about whether this guy's guilty or innocent, and none of the evidence has really been heard. Only what the state says they have is evidence.
Not much I can tell you folks at this point in time. You can't hear? Yeah, okay. There's not much we can tell you at this point, seeing that we just got involved in this case. I did hear the district attorney outline his case. I will say to you folks that it's extremely circumstantial in nature. In terms of speaking to my client, the only thing I can tell you that he did say as he was in tears was, "I didn't do this." We obviously don't have any evidence. This is the beginning of the case. Everybody is presumed innocent in our country. There's a presumption of innocence, and we're looking forward to fighting this case in a court of law, not in the court of press.
He matches the description. He matches the description of someone seen at Amber Costello's.
So that's all I can tell you, folks. If you have questions that I can answer, I'm happy to do that on a general level. But I don't know specificity. So
his wife in the arraignment?
I don't know.
His exact words were, "I didn't do this,"
Correct.
and he was in tears.
What is his state of mind?
Well, obviously, anybody who's arrested and charged with 3 murders, obviously, he's distraught. He's clearly distraught about the charges here. Yes.
Mike, you said he denied it to you?
Correct.
What were his exact words?
I did not do this.
I did not do this.
Correct.
And when did he say that?
My belief isn't important. Your belief isn't important. It's really about the 12 jurors that are going to be sitting in the box one day, right?
You intend to take this to trial?
Absolutely. I mean, if you have an innocent person, you absolutely want to take it to trial.
Did you say his wife was here today?
I didn't say that, sir. No.
And he was crying while he said it?
Excuse me, you pleaded not guilty, right?
He pleaded not guilty.
I don't have any details. I believe he may have been arrested at his house, but I can step into this. So I don't know. Manhattan?
What about all the evidence that was provided?
I didn't see any evidence. Did you?
But all the...
You're talking about the district attorney outlining everything?
Yes.
The district attorney is a very competent prosecutor. He outlined what he thinks he can prove. To me, it was very circumstantial. But again, I haven't seen anything that I haven't developed a defense.
Have you been
really hard for us to comment. Other than it's important to know that when somebody's charged with a crime, you have to afford them some.
Have you been in touch with his family at all?
I just got this case an hour ago, so the answer is no.
What is your immediate reaction to the 200 Google searches on the Gilgo case?
I haven't seen him. I haven't looked at him. I can't tell you. Sorry.
But he was remanded without bail. You said you were going to do a bail application?
Yeah, the judge. Yeah, so the judge remanded him without bail, which is understandable under the circumstances. But I don't have any information in terms of risk of flight and the strength or weaknesses of the prosecutor's case to rebut that. So at this point in time, he's remanded, and obviously we'll have the opportunity to make the bail application at a later time.
One of the victim's cousins, actually, she spoke earlier today and was talking about the fact that, partial justice, and she was looking for full justice, and was very emotional about it. I mean, given all that and what the DA outlined and everything, do you believe that your client is innocent? The fact you believe
everybody
when
is
he
presumed,
told you that he didn't do it?
Everybody is presumed. I don't formulate a belief in my mind as an attorney whether somebody did it or didn't do it. Number one is there's a presumption of innocence, which everybody has to report him. And number two is whether the prosecutor, the government, can prove their case. So those are really two important things, and I'm not in a position to comment on anything.
Mike.
All right, folks, I'll take two more, then we got to go.
Do you intend to remain as his attorney? Did he give you any signal whether he intends to hire counsel?
I don't know. The judge asked us to take this case pursuant to the assigned counsel plan. I'm happy to take it. And I don't know what his intentions are, but obviously we'll find that out at a later date.
Do you know how his family is doing?
I don't. I haven't spoken to anybody. I'm sorry. All right, folks, have a great weekend.
So it's going to be really difficult for Heuermann to overcome the charges in this case. But during the B.O.L.O application, the prosecutor announced that there were 5 hairs that were recovered from those victims. 3 of those hairs were tested and already are in police custody with the result, frankly leading to these charges. And police are waiting for further analysis on the 2 additional hairs that are still out there being analyzed. Now the district attorney called out those hairs that matched Rex Heuermann and mentioned that 2 of the hairs also match Heuermann's wife. So what does that all mean? One explanation would be that Heuermann's wife was present when the crimes were committed. The DA and the police commissioner have confirmed that Heuermann's wife and children were not even in the state of New York, and in some cases out of the country at the time of those murders occurring. They simply were not there, according to the prosecution. So, as Tierney explained, the only explanation for those hairs ending up in the bags where the bodies were recovered would be through the process of transfer. In other words, Heuermann's wife, or her hair at least, came into contact with Heuermann, who later comes into contact with the victims in the case. Now that hair could have attached to Heuermann's clothes, for instance, or it could have been in the vehicle that they drive, and then fallen into those canvas bags where the bodies were placed, transferring Mrs. Heuermann's hair to the crime scene. Now, some really far out there psychologist majors are thinking, is it possible he could have planted those hairs, somehow vicariously placing his wife in the position and perhaps even making them vicarious victims, or his wife a vicarious victim in that case? I think that's a whole bunch of conjecture. But what we do know is that prosecution and police say that Mrs. Heuermann or the children were not at the murder scenes, and they don't appear to have participated in any way. So what's been so disturbing in the case is the unfolding facts that suggest Heuermann was communicating with his victims' family members on their phones, in effect taunting them after their loved ones disappeared, he knowing that they would have been dead by that point. He also went in and was checking the victims' phones for any follow-up messages they may have had over the coming days. The district attorney spoke about this and how important phone forensics are in this case, indicating that Heuermann not only kept at least one of the victims' phones, but he also personally had 4 burner phones that he was using. Now,
there's another aspect to the case I wanted to ask you about. There's a suggestion that they tracked one of his burner phones to a phone that made some taunting phone calls to one of the victim's family. That's odd as well. Now, in these serial killer cases of lore, let's say, you hear of them perhaps taunting authorities occasionally, but the families, did that strike you as odd?
Well, it was troubling, and yet it's not something that's out of the norm of what we've seen with other serial killers. I think of Robert Ben Rhodes, who killed a young girl from the Texas area. And in that particular case, he actually spoke with family members and taunted them. So seeing this kind of behavior here isn't outside of the norm. It is a stretch, but think about how powerful that must have made this predator feel to be able to talk to family, intimidate them further, to hold on to those pieces of connection to the victim, a phone, continue checking voicemails and messages, and it gives them this way to kind of vicariously roll in the dirt and relive this experience of taking a life.
Interesting, you know, because a lot of times you're right. This is all about power for these guys.
Now, police were able to link those phones to Heuermann and then forensically identify the cell tower or the small cells where each of these phones connected, getting a location and making phone calls. At times, even calling the victims in this particular case to set up what they believe would have been the court escort services. Then there was this tip that suggested that a possible killer in the case was driving a Chevy Avalanche. It came last March when police discovered that Rex Heuermann owned a Chevy Avalanche. And it was about that time that they went back and recovered information from Amber Costello's acquaintance. You can figure out what acquaintance is, who said he remembered Heuermann coming and trying to pick up and do a deal with Amber for a sex trade. He described the man in the Avalanche, 6'4", burly, dark hair, glasses. Well, when police started looking at the location where Heuermann worked, where he lived, where the victims were being disposed of, and where the victims were last seen, it was all too coincidental. It was an incredibly powerful clue that luckily law enforcement didn't overlook. So when the FBI's cellular analysis team looked at all of the cellular data, things started gluing together. They determined that there were overwhelming similarities in the case. And all of that forensic information, coupled with physical and the forensic DNA evidence that was coming forward, things that came from collecting the bottles out of Heuermann's trash to do DNA analysis, following him and picking up that pizza box that he threw in the dumpster in Manhattan and analyzing that, the noose began to tighten around this suspect. Now, a few days after police arrested Heuermann, we're starting to see this painstaking task of analyzing his home for evidence and now other locations, including that storage unit that I believe is going to have a treasure trove of information and additional evidence. In fact, Michael Ayala and I spoke about this and the public's perception of what's being recovered in this storage unit. Possibly something that would support the idea that Heuermann was collecting trophies.
Guys, and to that point, we know that there were a couple of storage units that were being looked into. We know there was some stuff taken out, maybe a box that looked like a cage. We don't know exactly what it was. It was covered by tarp. We know this guy looked into and had an interest, at least according to his internet searches, in sadism. We know child porn images of victims and their family, that type of thing. It sounds to me like this is the kind of guy, based on those phone calls and the way you described it, he's the kind of guy that may have kept mementos of something like this, where he could go back and relive this situation. Is that a possibility in this case?
I think it's absolutely a possibility, Michael. And you think about these kinds of predators and this idea that they're a sexual sadist, the kinds of things that we're learning about from the search warrant and from the arrest affidavit that talk about what really begins to give us insight into what their preferential victim type was, what maybe the physical characteristics as we look at the kinds of material that they're searching online for, or the magazines that are recovered in this search. We're going to learn also what kind of things were motivating the kinds of crime that this individual would have committed and how they would have committed it. So it's not only just who is this individual who was victimized, but it's what the victim selection process was. What was the fantasy that was driving the crime itself? And all of that, I think, is going to be tied together by the kinds of things that they recover. They may find trophies. Some people, the trophy is kept up here. Others, they got to hang on to something that tells them, I remember that day. I mean, we think of it from legitimate circumstances of the guy who's holding his big fish that he caught so that he can tell all of his friends about it. For a serial killer, they got to have something that kind of helps them remember. So whether it's physical or in the mind, they still want something to help them remember and relive the experience.
Well, that storage facility in Amityville is attracting a whole bunch of attention. The DA was very clear that they are looking for anything that would jump out and tell them more about this suspect. The DA reiterated that the victims in this case were recovered with their bodies intact, that they weren't decapitated, and that's really different from other victims that are found along that Long Island beach system. Several of the victims had been decapitated, cut into pieces, stuffed into different kinds of packages and bags, and even disposed of in different kinds of locations. And that disposal didn't appear, to me anyway, to be something that was caused by animal depredation. Animals picking up the body and maybe tugging on it and running off with a limb here and there. Nor does it appear that it's something that was created by natural events like shifting tides or rainwater. So I suspect this storage unit is going to provide things that are supportive of the cases in the state's criminal case. Things like trophies, mementos, or things that might help explain what this predator's fantasies were. Things like maybe pornography or bondage paraphernalia, things like that. So we spoke about this during our interview. We also learned that the cause of death for these victims was homicidal violence, which is kind of hard to understand. It means that it's death by any other means other than natural causes. Now, this creates a really tricky challenge for the prosecution, I believe, because they've got to prove that the victims were intentionally murdered by Heuermann, all as part of these murder charges that they're bringing to place. Now, if there was only one victim, I suspect Heuermann might have a possible defense of that he was out with this sex trade worker who maybe overdosed and died unexpectedly by accident, and that he was so freaked out he just packaged her up and dumped her alongside the riverbanks or alongside the marsh. But keep in mind, trying to say that 3, potentially 4 victims dumped in the same manner was all accidental is going to be, frankly, impossible to overcome. So one interesting question that was fielded by Michael on Court TV was why Heuermann focused on sex workers as his preferential victim. And I offered these thoughts in return on the matter.
What's the deal with sex workers? Is it just me, or does it seem like these guys tend to have a fascination with sex workers? You talked about picking the victim and going through that process. That's probably part of the high for them as well. But we see this often, or am I mistaken just because I've been sort of brainwashed by the things we see and read, but sex workers seem to be at the center of this.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to figure out what was going on and if there was an evolution in the type of victim that he selected over time, if in fact he truly is a serial killer. And so you got to keep in mind the fact that also these guys want to be successful. They want to accomplish this fantasy, which incidentally, they never can accomplish it. Reality is never as cool as fantasy. So it always falls short and they always have to return and try again. And so it might be just that the sex trade worker is easier to get control of, easier to get to leave their place of comfort, easier to go to a ratty hotel somewhere or to a John's home or to a location off-site to commit these kinds of acts. And so it's all about success for the predator.
And then, of course, there's the question on everybody's mind of whether Heuermann is responsible for more murders than the Gilgo 4, and the Gilgo 3, and possibly the Gilgo 4.
Interesting, and I know that these things from previous stories come from urges. We know there are 7 other bodies out there. It seems that there's a belief maybe these aren't all connected to him, But certainly my sense or my feel is that there's some other victims out there. These may not be the ones, these other 7 or 1 or 2 of them may be. But Mike, do you think there are other victims out there that we may find out about?
You know, I think it's possible, Michael, because again, these guys are good enough at what they do. We can challenge whether he was intellectual or anything else, but he was successful for a period of time. And over that period of time, like anything, the craftsman gets better at the trade. Now, eventually what we see in serial predators is that these organized offenders start to become disorganized, and that's where mistakes are made. Is it possible that there are other victims out there? It's absolutely possible. And it could be that there are evolutionary periods of time, because we may find that some of these victims, and as I've looked at them, some of the characteristics of the disposal site and the condition of the body don't match up. But that still doesn't mean it's the same guy or isn't the same guy, because he could be evolving.
Yeah, no doubt. You know, and again, like you said, he may have evolved over time, got better at his craft. We see that often in these cases as well. Thanks to Mike King. Mike, always a real pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for clarifying.
Well, the next court appearance for Heuermann is going to be on August 1st. But there are other legal issues that this guy is now facing, as his wife has filed for an uncontested divorce. Now, there are a lot of people who are showing his wife and children some pretty judgmental comments in social media. In fact, I've heard a lot of judgment being thrown about whether she was involved or not, whether she knew or not, whether she should have known or not. My experience is in many of these kinds of cases, especially serial killer cases where they're living these secret lives, somebody is shattered alongside as collateral damage and in effect didn't know what was going on. So I would just caution all of us to be a little kinder, a little less judgmental as we watch this thing unfold. We might be surprised, who knows? But here's where I want to know your thoughts, folks. I hope that you'll put your comments down below on this one as we continue to watch the case unfold. I mean, this has been a really interesting week for me, mainly because I've followed this case for more than a decade. If you remember, I was doing specials on this case for A&E 10 years ago, so this is really one that I've been following with great interest. Let's keep watching this one together, and please take a moment and hit that like and subscribe button and ring the bell so you're getting all of our videos, and please share Profiling Evil with your friends and those on your contact list. You know, we love growing here at Profiling Evil. We hope we're doing it in a responsible way. And if you feel so inclined and you'd like to donate to us, please do so through PayPal, Amazon. Amazon gift cards are great ways to help out, or through avenues that are provided here on YouTube. Your support really does help us continue to roll out quality content. And the links to go to those places are down below. Remember that you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And hey, we've even got a new Thread account, so please check us out there. And for those of you who like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil on your favorite podcast platform. Make sure that you're checking out all of our sponsors here at Profiling Evil. They're in the description area below. And don't forget to check out our Long Island serial killer story map. It's a great place to not only see the geography of these crimes, but to get some insight onto each of the victims in the entire Long Island serial killer case infrastructure. Now, the Gilgo Four are the case that Heuermann is facing right now. So it's going to be interesting to watch what's happening. But make sure you're checking out that story map. And I want to call out my friends over at Esri and thank them for giving us here at Profiling Evil access to Esri technology. So thanks again for all your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.